Do you take responsibility for the fact the UK has the highest inflation in the G7 and the lowest growth projections?
So I think we've had this debate in the past, and if you look at the growth projections, actually we were the fastest growing country in the G7.
I asked a very specific question. No, I asked a very specific
22.
question, which is, do you take responsibility for it?
Of course, I take responsibility for the government. But I think just to correct what you're saying, I think it's important. As actually the head of the IMF.
No, sorry. Do you dispute those facts? We have the highest inflation rate in the G7 and the lowest. Well, no, I'm just asking if he disputes the facts, because there's no point in giving a 2-minute answer.
I'm putting them in context because it's important. As the head of the IMF themselves says, because those are the numbers that you are quoting, the head of the IMF themselves said at a press conference here in the UK, which I'm sure the Honourable Lady was listening to, she's quoting the figures, that it is actually not right to focus on one specific year when it comes to growth forecasts. And actually, if you look at any period, either the 2 years before, where we were the fastest growing country in the G7, all the projections for the years thereafter, we are not the lowest growing.
I'll move to reality then.
She asked about inflation, which I think is important. Worth bearing in mind.
Sorry,
if you look
Prime Minister, I've got quite a few questions I need to ask you, and I think it's important to focus on the reality of the people contacting us in Parliament about the realities they face.
I want to ask you this. The illegal migration bill, which was introduced earlier this year, since the bill was introduced, 8,128 people have crossed the channel in small boats. So if we assume your Rwanda policy is upheld in the Supreme Court, Rwanda has said they can take a capacity of 500 people. So that leaves 7,628 who've come across since the bill was introduced. What do you intend will happen to those people?
As I said, I'm not going to talk about a private commercial contract that we have, but our Rwanda scheme, as we have said multiple times, is uncapped.
Okay.
So I think
that's
that is
not what
important.
The Rwandans say, is it?
Well, the Rwanda scheme is uncapped, and which is why I believe it can act as a very helpful deterrent when the scheme is up and running.
Can I move on to your other promise, which is around dealing with the backlog? And when you came last time, you said you were going to double the workforce, triple productivity, and re-engineer the system to deal with the backlog, the legacy backlog. Yet the National Audit Office has found the Home Office is not yet making enough decisions to actually achieve your target of clearing that part of the backlog by December 23. So I just wondered what's going wrong, because you were very chipper last time about how you were going to deliver this.
Yes, so I think when I made the announcement, the legacy initial asylum backlog was around 92,000. When I gave the update earlier this year, that had reduced by almost a fifth, by about 17,000 down to around 74,000. So that is the progress that has already been made in reducing the legacy initial asylum backlog. And I said that those numbers were when I last gave the update, but they were down by around a fifth.
So you'll deliver by December?
Time's up.
Thank you. The Ministerial Code says when Parliament is in session, the most important announcements of government policy should be made in the first instance in Parliament. So why did you announce the NHS workforce plan, not in Parliament, but outside Parliament?
I've always tried to announce what I can in Parliament. I think my track record, and the Speaker's always said in the past that I particularly have done that. Where that's not possible, or the statement is made immediately thereafterwards, particularly in areas...
You announced it last Friday.
I think particularly where it's worth considering that this is not just the government's plan, it's also the NHS's plan.
You could have announced it in Parliament on Monday, couldn't you?
As I said, this involved not just the government, it involved also the NHS. Because it was the NHS's long-term workforce plan. The government was pleased to support it and proud to support it, and it's a plan that will do something special for the NHS in this 75th year.
The Speaker said yesterday the Prime Minister is a Member of Parliament. He is answerable to the Members of Parliament from all political parties. I have to say that his behaviour was not acceptable. He may be the Prime Minister, but the Members of Parliament should hear first. Have you apologised to the House yet?
As I said, I continue to be in Parliament to answer members' questions on a range of issues, making statements on a range of topics, and will continue to do so.
But you're not coming to Prime Minister's questions tomorrow, are you, or next week?
Yes, because I am attending the 75th anniversary celebration for the NHS.
And you decided when that should be, so you could have had it tomorrow evening or tomorrow morning?
No, again, that's not right. I did not decide when that was, and quite frankly, even if it was on a different day, Also, because His Majesty is in Scotland on Wednesday, it might have been reasonable for me to be there as well. And with regard to the week afterwards, I'm also at the NATO summit.
Remind us when a Prime Minister
I don't know whether is the honourable gentleman suggesting that I shouldn't attend the NATO summit on behalf of the United Kingdom, as previous Prime Ministers have done.
Remind us when a Prime Minister last missed 2 Prime Ministers' questions in a row.
As I said, I don't know, but
yeah.
As I said, I think it's important. Is the honourable gentleman suggesting that I don't attend the NATO summit, which I'm not in control of the dates of?
No, I'm suggesting that you should be attending Prime Minister's questions and
not attending the NATO summit.
And you should have made the statement to the House of Commons, because your own ministerial code says that that's what you should do.
So your view is your view is that we should not be attending the NHS celebration or the King's coronation celebration in Scotland, or indeed the NATO summit. I mean, that's a perfectly reasonable point of view.
Let me ask you a different question.
Pointing out the Leader of the Opposition also will be speaking.
We're talking about your turning up in Parliament.
NHS.
We're talking about your respect for Parliament. You didn't turn up for the Owen Paterson votes at all. That's right, isn't it?
I can't recall.
You didn't turn up for the Boris Johnson votes at all, did you?
No, I was at a charity dinner for Jewish care.
I think that's some cutting it fine, I would argue, since other members of Parliament who were at the same dinner with you and left after you did manage to get back for the vote.
I think, with greatest respect, I think their role and my role at the dinner probably slightly different.
You chose not to be there, didn't you? That's twice. On 2 rule-breaking moments, you chose not to be in Parliament. But yesterday, you opined on the rules of cricket. Take us through that.
I chose to fulfil my obligation to an incredible charity for whom that is one of their significant fundraising moments of the year. My presence there was something that they had asked for, and actually me being there and being able to thank their volunteers and donors was something that they appreciated.
Others were there. Wes Streeting was there as well. He managed to get back.
Again, with the greatest respect, I think his role and my role at that dinner were probably slightly different. I'm very happy to talk about the rules of cricket, as you mentioned.
Yeah, but not about rule-breaking in Parliament.
No,
so
that's my point.
I've also addressed that too. If I might ask you about the Privileges Committee then. So the Privileges Committee has accused 7 MPs of trying to undermine and impugn its work. The Leader of the House has condemned this. Do you think that they should apologise to the House?
I haven't actually gone through the report yet. So
you haven't read the report?
No, I haven't been through the report yet in detail. I've seen it being reported, and I've been very clear in the past that...
But you asked Zach Goldsmith to apologise?
Yes, because he's a minister.
So you have read it sufficiently to note that Zach Goldsmith should apologise?
Yes, I've read the findings report. I haven't read the report from cover to cover, no. But
I
have read the
findings. It's about 3 pages long.
Right, but I've seen the findings.
You know that Zach Goldsmith ought to apologise, but you haven't got an opinion about whether the other 7 should
because
apologise.
There's a difference between Zach Goldsmith's role as a minister, and I think that wasn't consistent with him being a minister, yes.
So you have read the report?
I have not read every page of the report.
Okay.
Sorry, which are you talking about? Which reports? Sorry, anyway.
There are 2 reports. The report that we're considering next week, the one in which it says that the committee thinks that the 7 members of Parliament, all of your political party, were seeking to impugn and undermine the committee report. Let me ask you something else. You have to authorise all foreign travel by trade envoys and other parliamentarians and parliamentary private secretaries. In the last year, that's cost £264,192. Why won't you publish the details of who that's being spent on?
It's not something I'm familiar with the details of past practice on that, but I'll happily look into it.
Prime Minister, I hear alarming reports of a blob wandering down Whitehall, thwarting the ambitions of ministers. Do you recognise that characterisation?
No.
So where do you think it comes from?
It doesn't come from me. That my general experience has been in the jobs I've had, whether it's starting out at MHCLG, where I spent much time with Clive, but also in particular at the Treasury over the last few years, and now in Number 10, that I've always been supported by incredibly hardworking and diligent civil servants who responded to what I needed and worked all hours, day and night, to deliver what I wanted.
We're halfway through the year, and you want to halve inflation this year, and how is that going? What probability would you assign to you achieving that by the end of the year?
Well, I'll leave that to the forecasters, but we remain committed to bringing inflation down. And halfway is a step on it going back down to the inflation target, which is obviously even lower than that. And now it's clearly inflation proving more persistent than people anticipated. But that doesn't mean that the plans and the policy options that have been deployed are the wrong ones. Indeed, they're the right ones. Whether that's monetary policy, responsible fiscal policy, or supply-side reform, that's the right toolkit that you need to deploy at bringing inflation down. We just need to continue to stick to the course, and that's not easy. That involves difficult decisions, but those are the right long-term decisions for the country, because if we don't do that, inflation will just get worse and last for longer, and that doesn't help anybody.
You've mentioned forecasts, and the Bank of England, the chair of court, has actually written to the Treasury Committee to say that they're going to do a root and branch review of their inflation forecasting models because they have been wrong. So what percentage would you put on achieving your goal of halving inflation?
I don't have one for you. I'm working 100% to deliver it, and we will keep doing that. That's all I can do, is just keep throwing everything at it. And as I said, the broad mix of policy levers we have of the monetary policy, which is independent of government, fiscal policy, which is in our control, and supply-side reform. Those are the two levers that we have that we will make sure that we use fully. And I think everyone can see that this is incredibly important, and it's important that we tackle it, because that's ultimately what is making people poorer. It's eating into the money in their pockets, and that's why defeating inflation is such a central premise and plank of our economic strategy.
Do you accept that there's a higher probability as of today that you will miss that target than there was at the beginning of the year?
I think there's a range of forecasts, but I don't spend my time on that. I can't control. What I can control is what we're doing. And what I can tell you is we remain committed to bringing inflation down.
Prime Minister, I fear that we are on the cusp of the Gaza crisis of 2023. Yesterday we took up presidency of the UN Security Council. How do you hope that over this month we will use that to shed a light on what is taking place, but also what outcomes will we achieve during our presidency?
So what were you referring specifically to, Alicia?
So the Gaza crisis, so essentially Israel-Palestine, but also as President of the UN Security Council the next month, what have you tasked Foreign Office civil servants to achieve?
Well, I think there's a couple of different things. Now, obviously, with regard to the current situation in Israel and around, of course, we support Israel's right to self-defense and have condemned the recent terrorist attacks. We would say that the protection of civilians must be prioritised in any military operation, and would urge the IDF to demonstrate restraint in its operation, and for all parties to avoid further escalation in both the West Bank and Gaza, both now and in the days ahead, and also call on Israel to adhere to principles of necessity and proportionality when defending their legitimate security interests.
Isn't it the main problem that the UK government represents English interests while at the same time being the arbiter and referee for the whole of the United Kingdom? And you've now given yourself the powers of the European Union. Surely the four nations idea across the UK just isn't working anymore.
No, I think actually, look, the Scottish government, as far as I can recall when I last looked at this, was probably the most powerful devolved assembly anywhere in the world. If not the, certainly one of. Government also delivered all the recommendations in the after 2016. Those have all been delivered. And I think the UK government is right that it looks after UK-wide interests. Now, as I say, sometimes those will conflict, and we've seen that with the Section 35 on the Gender Recognition Act. There's a court process to resolve that, so we should let that
saving Scotland from itself with legislation like
no, reform. I think that's because
like there's DRS. Is it your job now to be the corrective feature when it comes to devolution issues that you don't like?
No, actually, I mean, on DRS, actually, the drinks industry raised concerns about the Scottish government's
your job is to do that on their behalf,
differing on the rest of the plans for the UK. Now, it's because they had an interaction with UK interests that the UK government was requested for the UKIM exclusion, and actually, as I said, there was an exclusion given on narrow terms, and the decision to not proceed was a decision that was made by the Scottish government.
So it was said to be in the English national interest, therefore it will be judged to be in the UK interest. Is that how it works now? I'm trying to understand how we get to where we are with these. If it's four nations, surely all four nations should be equal in how these issues are approached.
Well, as I said, the operation of the scheme had an impact on UK-wide interests, and that's why UKIM exclusion was sought, granted on a narrow basis, which would allow the scheme to proceed in a particular way. It was a decision, I think, of the Scottish Government ultimately not to proceed with it.
Yeah, because you made it possible for them, didn't you?
That's not right, actually. I think the Chief Executive of Circularity Scotland was categorical.
It had nothing to do with you.
I think it was categorical that the scheme remain viable on that basis, and many successful schemes run without glass. So it was the Scottish Government that decided not to proceed, and that's a decision that they can explain.
Come on to matters to do with House of Lords appointments, if I may. Could you just briefly explain what you understand to be the conventions around resignation honours, and in particular the nomination of new peers?
So my understanding is that previous Prime Ministers are entitled to resignation honours. They would go through the normal vetting process. I followed what I understand and believe to be the long-standing convention of forwarding those names to the Palace for clearance after they have been through the vetting process, without any active involvement, engagement or interference in that process.
And so you conducted your constitutional role entirely proprietorily?
Yes, as I said, I had no active involvement or engagement in that process. I received a list and forwarded it on unaltered.
The list that came having been vetted by the House of Lords Appointments Commission?
Absolutely.
And I think there's only one example in the past of that not being the case, is that right? Not with yourself as Prime Minister? I'm
not familiar with that example, but...
Well, I think the example was Lord Truddas, and the next day he gave the party a donation, but they're entirely unrelated, I'm quite sure.
I said, I've whatever list that I've received that has been through the vetting process, I forwarded on without interference or active involvement in it.
Thank you for clarifying that. Could I ask if you think there's any circumstances under which a resignation honours list is not appropriate?
I said, look, it's a long-standing convention that's been adhered to by, I think, parties of on both sides of the House, and I've fulfilled what I believe to be my constitutional role in following convention in forwarding on a list that I received that had been vetted for approval without interfering and opining on it, and that has generally been the case for political honours more broadly. They're forwarded without the person in charge necessarily agreeing with political honours more generally, and that's how the system has worked.